Okay, so this is as Laura mentioned, I did this workshop in the summer, responding to student writing, and I'm very honored to be asked back because this is something I just love to do. And that just putting the title out there, a couple of titles: Associate Dean for Assessment and Curriculum, and I'm also an Instructional Associate Professor. But Laura gave you a little bit of a background, but I've forgotten that she had that, and I wanted to provide you with some context about why me. Because as she mentioned, I have been in your shoes, and it's a different thing. Did the screen change? Okay, good. Then we're rolling. So just some quick, I'll just pop it all up here then. I am a first generation high school graduate. So just for a little context about why teaching and learning is important to me. I got my bachelor's. I thought I wanted to go to law school, realized that's not for me. And so went back to my original plan of teaching and began teaching in SAISD in 1992. I spent about 13 years total teaching in San Antonio, at both San Antonio and Northeast, and then a couple of years in Cy-Fair ISD, where that included some dual credit and some instructional coaching. I have taught 8th grade, from 8th grade through 12th, the correlated language arts, as we used to call them, all the way to GT and dual credit. So I've kind of seen all of them. I've been an assistant professor for coordination of English education programs. I was the coordinator of freshman composition before we merged into the Super College of Arts and Sciences in 2022, and I was asked to be assistant dean for assessment. Was promoted to associate dean in May of 23. And so that's where I spend most of my days now. So I really enjoy getting to talk to teachers or students when I can. And then the personal side of me, yes, I am the mother to 3 adult children, 2 who have graduated, thankfully, from college. And the youngest just recently told me, as of her freshman year in Blinn, that she wants to be an English teacher. So she's applying to transfer into A&M. I think she's just trying to get all the money, but there won't be any. So just a quick thing about some objectives. And I had some objectives, as we all kind of like to start with what's the plan, but then you all filled out some things about your hopes and your challenges. So I kind of wanted to look at what I thought might be your objectives for this as well as mine. I want to discuss rubric designing in a way that you can save your sanity, because all of my day pretty much is now spent doing assessment work, meaning I read the program reports that come from all of our different departments that go up for accreditation. So it really, really, really matters what's in those reports. And it's anywhere from physics and English and all of it in between. And it boils down to the same thing. I'm still just a writing instructor. So there's a way to chunk it to save your sanity instead of getting caught on so many little things. I'm going to show you how to map to the TEKS. This was originally targeting, I was asked to do the English ELA 3 TEKS. I didn't forget history. I promise you, we're in there. And then I want to provide you with some resources before we end. But from things that I heard that a lot of you are looking for is you want some tips for providing quality and timely feedback to your students. And that's a challenge at every level, every year. It doesn't matter how many letters you have behind your name or where you work. There's always a challenge to how do you manage that, which kind of leads into you wanted some ideas for how to manage your workload. That can be in how you design the assessment piece can help you with that. And then hopefully give you some time to ask some questions and network, because I know there were several people who mentioned they were looking forward to meeting some people to get some ideas. And that's kind of what I hope comes of this, and what I think Humanities Texas fosters is a sense of community around writing. So I was thinking about, what is this about? We're really talking about feedback. How do you give feedback, and what is feedback? And this, in all of the work I've done over 30 something years with whether 8th grade students or future teachers or veterans, this is one of the hardest things, is how do you help someone improve their writing? And so I kind of like to think of it as it's a conversation when you give feedback. It's really like a dialogue that takes place. And I will even tell my students, I am notoriously tough on rough drafts. I read rough drafts with a fine-tooth comb, and I put a lot of comments, and it's more like a running commentary where I might ask a question in one paragraph. And if they answer my question in a couple of paragraphs later, I'll even make a comment, "Oh, you answered my question," to kind of let them know. Just read that think of it as a dialogue, that yes, there's a grade attached to it, but this is really a conversation that we're having about how to make it better and make it more precise. But kind of don't forget when you look at all this, what the keywords are. You want it to be a conversation and dialogue. It's very easy to say because there's a big push in higher ed for ungrading, which I don't even know how to wrap my head around. How, I mean, contract grading is one thing, but ungrading is a whole other thing, because at the end of the day, we have to assign something. The state requires us at all levels to provide some type of evidence. And so, yes, there is a grade attached, but it should still be a conversation with you and your students. And just keep in mind, your objective is really for continuous improvement. You're trying to get them to get what XYZ skill better on the next one. It was a great movie, so I had to throw it in there. You don't have to tackle everything everywhere all at once. That's kind of where you can get overwhelmed. Thank you, Maya, for getting that reference. It's a weird but good movie, yeah, when you think about it. And it's kind of true. So this was a graphic I used in the summer because it's something I totally relate to. So I don't know how many of you can relate to this image, but this was kind of how my life felt for the first probably 10 years of teaching. Folders, right, in different classes. I even got down to where I would color code by prep. If I had 2 or 3 preps, I'd do one color for, one prep and a different color for another. And then I got to a point where, okay, I've got a graded and a to be graded. And so I would color code the graded folder to be a color I like, to try to incentivize myself. Let's fill that color faster, trying to find all these little ways. But it's not whatever works for you, because the most satisfying feeling was to see that desk, to see that clear desktop. I can't find my desk right now at work. It's buried. For about the last, at least 10 years, probably 15 years, I don't take anything in written form. Everything is electronically graded now. It's either that's a image from Canvas. What Canvas shows us when I've graded everything, I rarely get to see that little thing. So that's why I had to screen share it, because it's like the cutest little thing, a sleeping panda. You're done, time to recharge. But I mean, if we had some way of those external, reminders to incentivize us to get through it, that's one thing, but we've got to find ways to motivate ourselves. So back to the task. I was first asked to look at the English Language Arts 3 TEEPs. And I forgot to start my timer, so please give me a heads up, Laura, if I'm going too fast or too slow. I apologize for reading to you. I know you're capable of reading, but I kind of want to get through some of this to make sure we know what we're talking about. So for English 3, one TEEK in particular that focuses specifically on writing reads as composition, listening, speaking, reading, writing, and thinking using multiple text, or the writing process. The student uses the writing process recursively to compose multiple texts that are legible and use appropriate conventions. The student is expected to plan a piece of writing appropriate for various purposes and audiences by generating ideas through a range of strategies such as brainstorming, journaling, reading, or discussing. Okay. The student is expected to develop drafts into a focused, structured, and coherent piece of writing in timed and open situations by using strategic organizational structures, developing, engaging, reflecting depth of thought. The student is expected to revise drafts to improve clarity. The student is expected to edit drafts. The student is expected to publish written work. So if you only have this one TEEK as your job, you'd have a whole year's worth of stuff to do. And I realize that. So that's part of the, how do you manage this job? Because I know that you have a whole lot more. And if you, my English colleagues, if you have not taken a look at our social studies and history colleagues' TEEKs, oh my gosh. I looked at the English, U.S. history, basically their junior year. And I didn't realize how many subcategories you guys have within. It reminds me of why I didn't do a social studies composite for certification. There's just way too much that you are expected to touch on. So how do you manage that? So I tried to pull out how, if I'm thinking about it from an assessment standpoint, and I'm asking my faculty to do this, not do everything everywhere all at once, what could you pull on? And the best thing you can do is break it down. You want to pull out your action verbs, things that you can accurately measure. And I'm going to have to tell this quick story. I pick on my biology colleagues because they just gave me the perfect setup. When they submitted their assessment report a couple of years ago, one of their student learning outcomes was students will master biology knowledge, period. And these are people with PhDs. They're very smart. And so, me being me, I responded, what does that mean? Because I'm cold, does that mean I've mastered biology knowledge? What do you mean? And they responded, okay, sarcasm noted, but, here's what we mean. And so I think sometimes it's hard if you think about what are action verbs, things that you can measure. So I was like, I don't know science, but tell me meiosis. Is that something you can measure, how students learn, progression, or platelets or something? You don't have to do everything in your assessment. Just pick on something that you can measure in each assignment. And regardless of what everyone says, be mindful of your time, because you probably know this by now, you will spend more time giving feedback and reading their papers than 90% of them will spend on composing them. It doesn't matter how old or what level they are. Students just don't spend as much time on it as we do, believe me. And then adjust when necessary as the year progresses. So if we pull out some of those teaks and then think about how do we interpret them, from the previous line, it said students are supposed to compose multiple texts. Okay, what does that mean? If you are in a situation, my first year teaching, I was literally handed a teacher's edition and a set of, it was called the essential elements then, and said, go teach. There was no scope and sequence, there was nothing. So I had to figure out, what am I doing? If you have that much flexibility, it can be scary. Or you might be in a place that's very rigid where you are down to the second mapped out. But then you have to think about, what does composing multiple texts mean? Yes, frequency is good. Small little pieces writing over time, that practice makes perfect thing. I like to think of the quality over the quantity. And when I assign essays, I go by word count rather than pages, because I'm sure you've all seen the trick where they put 47 font and, and here's 3 pages. No, by word count. But I'm also the one who, if it's 750 to 1,000 words and a student turns in 740 words, and they wrote a very good essay, their argument's well written, they've got it crafted, then I'm not going to flunk them because of that. But think about it, if they got it that precise, they're very adept at vocabulary and syntax, much more than they need from me. So that's kind of where we have those ranges. So think about the quality of the work over the frequency, over the quantity of how much you ask them to do. It still cracks me up that it says legible. Students will compose legible things, because I have the worst handwriting ever. So I interpret that to mean, okay, if they can print it or give an electronic submission, that's going to save you some time on your grading. If you don't have to figure out what is this word this student has written, your eyes and your time will be saved. You're asked to look at appropriate conventions. This is a place where you can really get caught up. And I want to ask you not to, especially my history colleagues, that this is kind of the easy place to grade. You would think in writing, it's kind of the go-to that anyone who, if you've never gone through writing pedagogy, or even if you have, you're thrown all these papers at once and said, here, grade 50 papers by Friday. What do I do? Well, the easiest thing is to how many commas are out of place, how many words are misspelled. But that doesn't necessarily mean perfect grammar, doesn't necessarily mean good writing. So pick maybe 1 to 3, depending on what the assignment is, a type of convention to focus on over the paper. And I'll talk a little bit more about some convention tricks in a little bit. You're asked to write it in a range of strategies. To me, that means low stakes. If you've got some low stakes writing assignments that are just for completion grades, students will take risks a lot bigger than I remember. My freshman year of high school, a long time ago, my English teacher, I think it was her first year teaching. I remember her name, Miss Cragen. She wasn't married, but she came in and we had what we now would call journaling, but she called it notes to myself. And we would start the class with that, but it was always something different. One day she brought in a pair of red stiletto heels and just sat them on a stool and said, write, and okay, you just write what you think. Another time she had, there was a group called Supertramp. They had a song called The Logical Song, and it has all this vocabulary in it. So she had us, listening to the vocabulary and listening to the words and music. And it wasn't, I don't know that she read them closely, but we got credit for doing it. But none of us minded doing it because it was something interesting, and we weren't dinged for it. So those little low stakes writing exercises can help with students who are, kind of writing phobic, that there are a lot who are reluctant to write. We can talk, haven't forgot about AI. That was something that came up with a lot of you. And I've got that towards the end because since I did this presentation in summer, and now that has really changed the landscape from June. It's amazing how fast. Coherence. You were asked, students were supposed to write with coherence. And again, be intentional and give clear guidelines. If all I asked biology to do was tell me something about biology, and they say students will master biology knowledge, in their mind, that's right, because they should master biology knowledge, but I can't measure what that means individually. So give very clear, intentional things of what you mean by what you're grading. Students are supposed to revise drafts, and this can get exhausting, I know. And I say that from sitting in a position of when I teach a class, our classes are capped at 24 per section. So I know the privilege I'm sitting at right now. But I do read all the rough drafts, and I read all the weekly journals, and I read the discussion postings. So I still read it. But in the revision part, this is where you might do some reteaching of skills. So if you've noticed 10 out of 20 students, or even 8 out of 20 students have the same problem with subject verb agreement, maybe you do a little mini lesson, for reteaching at the revision point. Keep in mind, some are not going to do it, even if you point out it's a flaw and you give them tools to fix it. Some are still not going to do it, so don't take it personally. But if you've tried, then you've done your job. Editing, this is the same thing that can also get time consuming, and this is where you can use peer review and individual workshops to kind of speed up that step. And I'll talk a little bit about some peer review. And I've given a couple of, I know at least one I added on a peer review strategy for how to do peer review. And then publishing, as exhausting as it sounds, you have to require them to write the final draft, because they're not going to if you don't. And if they know that you're going to revise and correct their writing, or if I am grateful for grading online, because I do have them submit a rough draft. I grade it extensively, and then I literally open on one screen the rough draft and open the final draft in a new screen. And that's my quick scan at first is, okay, did they fix some things we addressed? And so if not, sometimes there is a student who turns in the exact same paper. Okay, you knew on the rough draft exactly what grade you would get if you turned in this paper. So there you go. It kind of makes your job easier. Sometimes a student writes an amazing first draft, but having them write that final draft holds them accountable for what you're asking them to do. So the next 3 slides I wanted to talk about are breaking out some of those specific skills that are related to ELA. But I do want to pause for just a minute to see, are there any questions, Laura or Elizabeth, that are like, stop, I'm confused, or need help, or? Okay.
You're good.
Okay. And I also apologize if a cat runs across in a minute. I have multiple felines that I shouldn't have. Okay, so one of the things, composing multiple text. And this is where it depends on where you are. But if you have the flexibility in your curriculum, try to vary your writing assignments. This will help you prevent burnout. Just some easy tips that you probably have already figured out. Don't grade if you're hungry or sleepy or in a bad mood, because they will be bad grades. I've done that before. I've been in the process of grading, and after about the 5th paper, I think, God, these are just awful. What's wrong? And I stop and walk away from it, and then come back to it at a later time and would grade the rest, and then go back and look at the first 5 and go, oh, I was cranky. I was still mad about something that had happened, or I was just tired, or there is still one assignment that even after 30 years, I still never get what I'm looking for, which means I'm still not asking for the right criteria. And one of these days I'll figure out how to do that. That's with the rhetorical analysis, which that's such a huge thing to do, but it's also should be simple. It's not. So start with some smaller assignments too, and build up over the course of the semester. I think I provided the syllabus that I use in my courses, but we have the major research papers at the end. There's 4 major writing assignments, and they start small and build. The first one is a visual analysis, and it's about 750 to 1,000 words final. And then the final research paper ends up being, I want to say it's 2,500 to 3,000 words. In the final. So we're writing progressively larger and larger assignments, and it helps to start out with those smaller ones and be a little more critical on the smaller ones at the beginning, so that you can build those skills throughout. And then if you can incorporate those low stakes reflective writing assignments each week, students can practice a specific skill. And this is where I'm giving credit and a shout out to one of my PhD candidates. In a year from now, maybe 9 months, she will be Dr. Snyder. So proud of her. But Annika Snyder is a grad student of mine who I started working with me in 2018. And when you start in the PhD program at A&M, you teach freshman composition in your first year. And so that's who I was always mentoring, as well as the faculty. But I hold them as a collaborative community that, yes, I'm supposedly the keeper of the curriculum, but it's not all about me. It's what did you do? What worked? What didn't work? How'd you modify it? What can we do? And Annika shared a assignment she does with her students that when she started saying, I was like, oh yeah, that sounds vaguely familiar, but she gets full credit for the way this iteration came out. She has something called a writing goals journal. So with the first assignment, the visual analysis, students will write. She used to do it in a sticky note. Pre-pandemic. And then of course, pandemic changed everything, but then moving back into the classroom, she kept it in a more cohesive form. So we've incorporated it to an actual journal assignment in addition to other writings they do. But they will set a goal for themselves of what they want to accomplish on that first essay. And there's no criteria for the writing goals journal other than you do it. And it's a completion grade. And so one student might say, I really want to work on my subject verb agreement. I don't know. It's up to them. They might want to work on passive voice. They might want to work on incorporating sources. It's completely up to the student. And so they'll set that goal. They write the rough draft and then the final draft. And then after the part of the reflection after the final draft is they go back and answer, did I meet my goal? And if they did, then they identify another goal they want to work on for the next one. If they did not, they can talk about, okay, here's where I think I might address it in the next one. So theoretically, a student could have just one goal for the whole semester. But if they never reach it over the assignments, they're still thinking about the writing they're doing and how they're crafting it. So it gets them to think about it. And then as an instructor, you're in dialogue with, yes, I see you've worked on this. I do see some improvement, even if you don't see it. Or maybe you're focusing in the wrong direction, and it's again that dialogue between teacher and student of just, hey, you're writing, and it's also trying to encourage them as well to keep going, because it's easy to just pull the red ink out. The next thing that you're supposed to do is talk about appropriate conventions, and as I was saying, this is kind of the place where if you haven't done writing pedagogy, this is the easiest way to fall, because it's the easiest thing to identify. We finally have we're in the process of, they're almost done, our institutional level rubrics for the coordinating board requires every core course, which is basically your freshman, sophomore year, to do communication, written, oral, and verbal in every single course, and critical thinking. That's easy for my people to do. My math colleagues, it gets a little challenging. So we've finally gotten institutional effectiveness to realize that one of the criteria on the rubric was incorporating sources, and another was, did a student build an argument? Well, I think you could build a case for a math problem being an argument, but the whole secondary sources part, that's kind of cheating. So, revise to resubmit. But my math colleagues would want to say, well, do we need to write it out in a paragraph? Well, no, because that's the easiest way then also for you to figure out. The equivalent would be me seeing, oh, no, they didn't put the right answer to the problem, but I'm not going to look at how they went through the process of solving the problem to help them. So this is one way. You don't have to comment on every sentence level issue in every single assignment. You're going to wear yourself out. So think about picking something that you want to focus on. But if you start to see a pattern of multiple students making the same type of mistakes repeatedly, then that's a great time to do a little mini lesson to focus on those skills. We had something when I was student teaching, they called it DOL, daily oral language, which was always weird to me because it was written, but yet they would speak it. But it was a sentence with problems, and then someone had to fix it. Those are little quick ways to work on it also. It can do it as a warm-up grade or as a completion grade. One of the things I've included in the materials for you guys are grading quick marks. If you have a sheet that you've kept for yourself, I have an Excel spreadsheet. So when I grade, I just cut and paste, because even though I teach them, multiple students make the same type of mistake. So the comment that I would make is pretty much the same on several papers. So rather than spending all of my time writing it over and over and over, I just copy and paste. Or if you don't have an electronic format, you can, thinking of how I did this before in teaching in secondary, in their binders at the beginning of the semester, give them each a handout with all of your quick marks and little codes. So then when you grade, you just use the code and they look it up to see, what does this mean for this? You can number them however you want to do it, whatever works for you to memorize. We used to do a long time ago, little editing marks, the backwards P for paragraph symbol and all of those things. I don't know that any of our students now know what any of that stuff means. My kids don't even know what a typewriter is. So if you can make it safer, easier for you and faster for them, it'll help you. Craft a careful writing prompt. Make sure you're being very clear, especially regarding the genre. And this, we'll kind of talk a little bit with some verbs in a minute for history, but thinking in English, for example, if you're writing a visual analysis essay, just have them focus on 1 or 2, 3 key elements, like maybe foregrounding or backgrounding. So they're going to talk about that. Or maybe they're going to talk about, if there's writing, what's the font style and the color choice. Or what are assumptions that the creator of the visual makes about the reader that's apparent in the writing. So make sure whatever you put in that prompt is what you're asking for, and you include that in your rubric. Pull the verbs out of the writing prompt into the rubric, because that's one way to cover your bases. Think about 2 to 3. Well, so if you think about when we did the OER for 104 for second semester freshman composition, we also redesigned the course. But it was very, very important to us. And this was 2019 fall, so we didn't know the pandemic was coming, but it was important to us to embed information literacy throughout, rather than having, in most composition textbooks, there's one chapter on information literacy, which is basically how do you incorporate a source? How do you look at the ethics of a source? How do you look at voice? It was more important to us that we weave it throughout. So starting on the very first writing assignment, there were 2 or 3 things related to information literacy that were important. And those 2 or 3 things were on every single rubric throughout the semester. And as the assignments get bigger, the rubrics get bigger, so you might add on to them. But think about, what are the 2 to 5 key skills that when these kids leave here, they need to say that Miss Stevenson taught me this. That is one way that to save yourself some time, but also to point to something you've mastered. And again, just remember, grammar mechanics are the easiest thing to count off on. I personally never have more than 10% of a student's grade on an assignment be dependent upon grammar, spelling, mechanics, because it's been a way to kind of disenfranchise second language learners a lot of times. And I've seen it at the university level, where my colleagues would argue that a student didn't deserve an A because of their grammar. But my retort was, yeah, but they built this amazing argument and used the sources to support it in the best way. I don't care that they talk about the tree green rather than a green tree. That doesn't matter to me. I knew what they were trying to say. So think about those types of things that are important. And then remember, consistency, clarity, cohesion. That's how you can focus on growth. What are they consistently doing well? How are they clear in what they're talking about? And does it make sense from start to finish? I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, there you go, Terry. The introduction to conclusion. I am huge on food metaphors, which says a lot about my life. But I've always used this thing about talking to my students about thinking of their essay as like a hamburger. And so what's the most important piece of a hamburger? And most of them will say the meat, because if the bun's not that great, you can still eat the meat, and maybe the condiments that go with it or whatever. But so thinking about the meat as the body of the essay. And so on most rough drafts, I just have them turn in the thesis statement and then the body. We'll do the introduction and the conclusion later. And it's actually better if you write the introduction last, because then you know what you're setting up and then you can revise it at the end. But there's places how do you start? They always think they want to start at in the first sentence. They want to write, this big grandiose sentence. Teaching statements. Oh gosh, when I taught pre-service teachers and they would write, their teaching philosophy, I would say no Whitney Houston lines, because there would always be, the children are the future. Okay, we all know that. How do you get to the point? So think about ways that they're not cliche or cheesy. And then, okay, the next thing that you've been asked to do is revise drafts and edit papers. And so how do you get a handle on this. And I mentioned earlier, peer review. Peer review is a great way. It doesn't shift the grading responsibility, but it can kind of shift some of the task, but you have to practice peer review. I used to get frustrated when I would do a peer review, and then they come back and I think, well, these are still bad papers. And then I realized a lot of times I was giving them the rubric that I was using to grade. They're not ready to do that. So pick out even more specific things in the rubric that you want them to focus on. And again, carry, just as you do with the rubric, carry it over from peer review to peer review to peer review. As you go through different peer review skills, give them the same. And I think I've included a standard review. If not, I'll send one of different things that you're always going to look for. There's always going to need to be, yes, this is where I have them do the sentence level things, because that's something they can do easily and help one another with, but also they see their own mistakes sometimes. But you carry it over from peer review to peer review, then they're practicing that skill. And then design the peer reviews that reflect the elements from the rubric, but only those things you feel confident that students should address. Because some things are, the quality of an argument, sometimes they're too critical of each other, or they're not critical enough. And so, that you don't want them to come away with their feelings hurt. It's okay for them to know that it wasn't perfect, but you want to try to avoid, you've all been there. You've taught the high school, the conflicts. I meant to say earlier about rubrics, something that happened when I taught 8th grade. And this was probably in 1996 or 97. That's how old I am. But I was teaching GT too. If you've ever taught gifted and talented children, they are special in many ways, but their parents think they're even more special than the rest of the world. And I was called to the principal's office because Johnny made an 87 for the first time in his life. He's never made a B, and it was just on an assignment, not on the grading period. And my response was, well, this is the best time for him to make a B because it's middle school. It's not counting like college, towards college credit, but training parents to see that it's okay. This is where it happens. That's when I learned that year, okay, I need to make a rubric that shows how I qualify my grades. Because flash forward to, I'm in a graduate class, my second semester or something, and I get a paper back from my instructor. It's like 5 pages, and I'm reading through comments. Brilliant, amazing, astounding, astute. And then at the very last page on the bottom of the corner, it says 87. And I said, I need an explanation. How do these words equal this number? So practice what you preach. How does it equal that? It gives you a way to cover yourself, because you guys are in a much more precarious position than I am. I can fall on FERPA and say, sorry, mom and dad, I don't have to talk to you, and I can't talk to you legally, but you can't do that. So the more you can, it's a lot of work up front, but once you get it set up, and then as you go through it each semester or year, you find ways to revise and adapt, because you have to, because kids change. But one thing that I did, 30 years ago, and was taught as an undergraduate, and that you probably still do, but maybe it's called something different, in peer review, was like the concept of clocking or color coding. And I included I think it says revising and editing the rhetorical analysis in the stuff, Laura. That is an assignment that uses this strategy to where, so maybe you have them in groups of 3 or 4. I don't go bigger than 4. It just doesn't, it goes beyond. It starts to become a social experiment at that point. And it doesn't matter if they're 14 or 82, they're still going to get off task. Keep it a timed focus on one specific issue in the draft as you're going through this process. And so let me tell you a little bit more about what it is. So for example, one of the things I have them do is whoever, if they're in groups of 3 or 4, whoever has the first section as we're clocking, highlight in one highlighting color the thesis statement, and then highlight the topic sentences of all the paragraphs in the same color. And so in theory, it's formulaic, but in theory, the thesis is the last sentence of the introduction, and then the topic sentences are the first sentences of all the body paragraphs. And so have them highlight those colors, and then step back and ask the peer reviewer, okay, I'm not asking you to read the whole paper, but I'm asking you to look at what you highlighted, and do all of these same color-coded sentences make sense? Are they coherent? Do they stay focused on the topic? Do they expand as the course of the essay progresses? Or could you just interchange them and it wouldn't matter what order they came in? And if the answer is the latter, then that's a way to teach. Okay, so you're not really going in depth. You want your argument to build, but it's a visual way. And then the next person, you switch and move to the next person and they pick a different task in a different color or a double underline or whatever, something to focus on something else that's in the element of the essay. But it's another way to help them focus on they're grading their peers, but they're also thinking about their own writing. Because I've heard students over the years in all different places come back. There's always one who's like, wow, my writing is terrible. I need to do a lot more work. And then there's one who's like, wow, I've really been critical on myself. Yeah, it's okay. There's variation. And maybe another thing you can focus on trying to do like writing groups, because it'll build a sense of community. And since you, I think you're still chunked into times of grading periods. I was one who would move my desk every 6 weeks or 9 weeks, depending on what the setup was. I didn't like the same organization. And I would move them as well, and just to change things up. So maybe change the writing groups, because if you keep writing with the same people, I've had that where I've had people that I write with for years and we both love each other's writing, but you know what? There's something that needs to be fixed. So I need somebody who doesn't like it to see it, or someone with a fresh set of eyes. If you can, I mean, since it's at the beginning of the year, choose them randomly at first. Hopefully that avoids some behavioral issues. We all know there's always going to be somebody that it won't matter. But also that way they meet someone new. It's a socialization way. Switching them after each grading period also helps to get some diversity. With peer review, I try not to have them review the same paper, same person for each assignment, so that they're varied. But I did have them work in a group on a public service announcement project where they still work together as a writing group. But then it just kind of helps build that sense of community. And then one of the most difficult things, because I know you don't have time is the one thing we can't give you. But individual writing conferences are very important. And I came to learn that later in my career. Again, I have a different situation and a different privilege, but the research paper is something we usually start about midterm, and then it builds over the course of the last half of the semester. And so that's the one that I require an individual writing conference with each student. And I have the luxury of being able to schedule 20 minutes of time across, a week over where I just sit at the desk and open Zoom every 20 minutes for somebody new to come in and have a conference about their rough draft before they write their final draft. And there are several reasons for it, but probably the primary reason is that assignment alone is worth about 30% of their total average. So it's really important that they get it right. And it's kind of my last, that's the final draft of the research paper is the only thing I will not take late. So they've got to get it right. And this gives me a way of covering my bases and feeling like I'm being fair and equitable. But at the same time, I get tired of sitting in Zoom for 20 minutes all day for 5 days. So how do you manage it? Well, put some responsibility on them. They have to come to the writing conference with me with 2 or 3 areas that they want to address in their rough draft, things that they think they need to fix before they turn in the final draft. And I tell them they have to assume I have not read their rough draft, and don't ask me if I've read it. Don't ask me how it sounds or anything, because I want them to really focus. And what I don't tell them is this is also a way for me to keep myself on task, because as I mentioned, I've got them set up in days, as the week progresses. So the night before, I try to make sure I've read all the rough drafts for the next day. So even if, I've got one at 8 a.m. and they open and they haven't seen my feedback yet, I can open the conference and they start telling me things they want to correct. And sometimes it's stuff that I've noticed, so I've given them feedback. Or, sometimes it's very different. Sometimes it's a chance for the student to tell you, something really bad is going on, or I'm having a crisis in this moment and I'm just stuck. So it's a chance for you to check in with them before they get to that high stakes. I also know the challenges in the secondary world. We used to do it where we would put a desk outside the door, 2 desks, and then you would conference out in the hall. Well, then you run the risk of what's going on when I can't see. So I say that fully understanding that this is not ideal, but if you have a way to do it, it'll work. If you have a colleague that you can work with, that helps as well. So Laura, any more burning questions or? Okay. I talked way too much. All right. So
Terri, we do have a very active chat, so we have some great
okay,
comments from teachers
good,
about their
good.
methods too.
Well, good. Oh, good. And can you save that? Do you save that, or by any chance, I would love to see that later. I miss teaching and especially working with teachers. That's something I absolutely love. So this is fun for me. Thank you all for indulging me. So it was about 3 o'clock this afternoon. I looked through this. I'm like, okay, why does it feel something's missing? And I went, oh yeah. What about history? Because I went back and looked through the list of who's here, and I noticed there's several of you that are in social studies related areas, whether it's junior high or high school. And so again, I was given the U.S. history, which I think this is junior year that this one comes, which still blows my mind that we teach it in 8th grade and then we don't pick up the second half until 11th grade. And a whole lot of growth happens to those human beings in those 2 years. But so the only one I could find that explicitly talks about writing in history was, like I mentioned earlier, you guys have several different things you're responsible for: citizenship, culture, government. I don't think it says maps, but it's basically maps and stuff. There's a whole lot that you have to do in your history class. So hats off to you. But the one was under the social studies skills that they called it, where the student is expected, the student communicates in written, oral, and visual forms. That's spoken like very well government language. The student is expected to create written, oral, and visual presentations of social studies information using effective communication skills, including proper citations and avoiding plagiarism. And that sentence right there makes the English teacher and me die a little bit, because you just told you to do everything I asked you not to do. Tells you to look at their grammar. We told you to talk about citation and plagiarism, which you turn it in is not always accurate. But then the next one, use social studies terminology correctly. Okay, that gives you a little bit of wiggle room. So I thought, well, I actually asked one of my colleagues who is a historian yesterday. He's our associate dean for graduate studies. I said, did you know there's not explicit composition skills in the history TEKS? And he said, I'm not at all shocked. That explains a lot about my own colleagues. So it's sad that there's not more direction for history, but so much writing occurs in history. And how do you write about history effectively? So there are a lot of verbs in your own TEKS, and I think it's 14 pages long, so I didn't pull them all out, but there were some that just kept popping up over and over to me. Analyze and evaluate the text of the Declaration of Independence. Analyze the impact of machine guns, airplanes, tanks, poison gas, and trench warfare as significant technological innovations in World War I on the Western Front. That's a dissertation right there. But evaluate the impact of muckrakers. And I love the names they include. Describe the military contributions of leaders during World War II. The subversive part of me loves that this is still in your TEKS. Explain how Jim Crow laws and the Ku Klux Klan created obstacles to civil rights for minorities, such as the suppression of voting, because we've had some rules, some laws passed at the higher ed level where we're not supposed to use certain words. So I'm glad to see that that's still in the TEKS. Identify the roles of significant leaders who supported various rights movements, and then the names they give you: Martin Luther King and Betty Friedan. I mean, there's a whole lot you've got to cover there. Compare and contrast the approach taken by the Black Panthers with the nonviolent approach of Martin Luther King Jr. So none of this says writing, but all of this, I don't know how students would demonstrate mastery of any of this unless it's in written form. I cannot imagine a multiple choice test that's going to get to the level that you need to get to on these skills. So I know that you all write them. So I did the same thing. What is the interpretation? What's the TEK, and how would I interpret it? So you're asked to analyze repeatedly. Analyze, analyze, analyze. So what they want you to do is break down the elements. What specific piece of that historical period do you want students to know? And then think about that, and then how do they demonstrate mastery of each one? It's not biology knowledge, it's machine gun warfare in a certain thing. So look at the different elements. You're asked to evaluate. Okay, that's kind of classification. where they could have students go through a classification phase. So you could create a hierarchy, or qualification. How do you qualify one over another? And so I'm sure you're all familiar with Bloom's. Look at your verbs that show how growth occurs in one area over another. You're asked to describe repeatedly, which can be very simple, it sounds like, because they just have to label or specify or distinguish. So these could be ways that you I've lost my vocabulary. You show aggregation across your rubric. If they just label, maybe that's a 1 out of 3. If they specify something, maybe that's a 2 out of 3. If they really distinguish something, that's your 3. So that gives you ways to show how one student describes, they just provide a list of things. Okay, they meet the bare minimum, right? All right. If they go into more detail, there are ways that you can show growth. Explain. Explanation goes back into analysis again. So think about how the explanation is different from the analysis. What is it you want them to do differently in an explanation than in an analysis when it comes to writing? Identify. Again, this is part of analysis and description, and you can't really identify things without thinking how they're alike and different. And then our old friend, compare and contrast, that uses everything. So I'm hoping that you are on a campus where you have colleagues in English that you get to work across disciplines with, because that really, really, really makes for the best type of work. But don't forget about our STEM colleagues too. They do write in math and science. They just don't think about it the ways we do. So we're all thinking about analysis. How does it occur? How do you show mastery in it? Okay, where am I? I have it, slide 14 of 17. So I'm almost done with the rattling on. The next couple of slides I have for you are some resources that I want to show you. So let me stop here then, Laura, and see what kind of questions or what's popping up that really stands out in the chat.
Yeah, people are just responding to some of the slides, but I don't know if you want anyone to. Oh, Nina just had a question I can read. Nina says, how do you have them buy into the peer reviews? I reflect categories from the rubric, but do not always have all students meeting deadlines. I teach dual credit students, so they struggle with learning how to college. Right now, I take the peer review as a daily grade, but I wonder if I should maybe take it as another grade, a quiz, or a major grade. Any ideas?
That's a great question. And there's so many layers to it. I would be hesitant to count a peer review more than a daily grade, just because they already, somebody's going to take it very seriously and someone's not. And so there need to be consequences, but it's also holding them accountable. And dual credit also, that was a conversation we had in our leadership meeting about AP credit and dual credit. And I say this as a former dual credit teacher and as a mother of kids who've taken dual credit, so I understand the value of it. But I almost kind of think we do students a disservice in some ways, and that's some of the work. One of the resources I'll show you in a minute that I've been doing with the coordinating board is about creating curriculum that's open for first-year writing courses. And so one of the conversations that I had today with the assistant commissioner is about audience. Okay, if I'm targeting community college instructors, forget they're not, Aggies are the easiest students to teach, quite honestly, because they come to us with a different skill set. That's not saying they're perfect and that they don't have room for growth, but having been other places, they're much, much easier to teach at the start. You don't have to do as much remediation that you might have to do in other places. But then when you layer on a dual credit assignment, you have 2 different bosses that you're accountable to. You have your school district and the TEA, and then you have the community college or university you're tied to and the coordinating board. So you really do a lot of extra work that nobody gives you credit for. So hats off. I wouldn't count it for more than a daily grade, just because they don't do it. And then I'm not above sarcasm and chastising. Really, is that all you got? Can you say more? I know that might not be politically correct, but it works. I've won some teaching awards, so it must have worked with someone. And one of the ironic things is when I got one at A&M, the teaching award, the person from the Center for Teaching and Excellence who came to present it to me, I was looking at him and looking at his name tag, and I said, your name sounds really familiar and you kind of look familiar. I was his 8th grade English teacher, and now he's a PhD. He's got a PhD working in, teaching excellence. So it was kind of ironic. I was like, whoa, that's my world just wound in on itself. Yeah, I wouldn't training them. You just have to hold them accountable to it and think about, I try to emphasize, you're the last stop before they turn in their final draft. What would you want someone to give you? If you're making a mistake and somebody sees it, don't you want them to tell you? Because it's not gonna, the completion grade, the whole grade is a daily grade for doing the peer review, is one way of approaching it. Oh, I hope if I didn't share, I will share with you a peer review thing that I've done where it grows and grows, because there is a category where you can offer advice or ask questions of the author. That has been a place where I've offered, if they do that section well, I do give extra credit. So that's kind of a little incentive that they can't do that if they haven't done all of the rest of the peer review at least halfway well. They can't offer advice or ask a question or seem engaged. So that's an extra credit. Again, usually those who don't need extra credit are the ones who do it, but it's there. We got to have some kind of carrot to dangle. There's nothing else. It's really hard. Okay. So because I want to make sure I give you this, this will be included in that whole title is a hyperlink that opens to this textbook that, if I can open in a minute, I might show one chapter. So this project I've been working on with the coordinating board, we're in about the 3rd iteration of it now. And so last summer, I had a group of some of my faculty, some of my grad students. I had some dual credit instructors from Cy-Fair ISD, so that they're also Lone Star College instructors. I had some dual credit instructors from San Antonio ISD, so they're also affiliated with the Alamo Community College District. And I had a couple of district level ELA coordinators working to develop just what's good curriculum, what do you need? Because the commissioner wanted a reading hub and a writing hub. And no matter how many times I would tell him, we don't pull those skills apart, he still wanted to, but he was going to give me twice the money to do it. Okay, well, and no, I didn't get to write myself a big fat check, but I got $1 million to pay other people to do things. And there's still money in there that I'm still paying other people to do it. So what's going to be in this project is stuff that's developed by people who are dual credit teachers, or they are university professors, but working in concert from the lens of, yes, we are A&M or UT or Rice, but not everybody is. So how do we create something for the person who walks in they get hired 2 days before the semester starts and they've never taught, and now boom, go. So that's kind of what this is, and why if you click on it, all the sections are locked except one because it's not good enough for my standard yet. Think of it as like a big pot of soup that I like to cook, and you go in, and if you don't like carrots, take the carrots out. But I would rather give you too much than not enough. But there's one chapter that is not locked, and that's the one that deals specifically with, and it's titled Generative AI in the Rhetoric and Composition Classroom. And this is a proud mama moment. Because the 4 grad students that worked on it are in my department. But really what makes me proud is Annika and Gwendolyn and Mary have all been secondary teachers themselves before going to grad school. So they're not just writing something as a theory. They're people who have done it in the secondary world. They've taught at the university level, freshmen, and realize the problems that happen. And now they are the ones who are working on the next level of scholarship in rhetoric that I don't even have time to spell anymore, but they're the ones dealing with ChatGPT, generative AI. We had somebody bring something to us. They've now figured out they can have a ChatGPT function that reads all of the readings for you that are in your class and summarizes them. So it's like, okay, when I ask for reading reflections, how do I know if it's my student? Or, those are problems that I don't even want to think about, because it's kind of like, oh, if I spend my time trying to catch them, the minute you catch them, they've already got something new. So these 4 grad students, knowing that, have embraced it. So if you go into that chapter, it's ways of, how do I use generative AI? Can it be a way to help students who have writer's block get started? And how do we're still trying to focus on academic integrity and ethics. We could all use that. but I'm just so proud of them. So that chapter is not locked because they've been asked to present at national places and publish some of it. So, and I just want to make sure they get all that credit. And this project is called D2S2, Digital Design for Student Success. But the coordinating board hasn't opened it yet either because they're still working on it. I have colleagues from UT Austin who have done the math side, but yet there's a lot of stuff that my math faculty have created that's going to be up for, oh gosh, the calculus. It's like a non-stats calculus, algebra, and some other common math course that's taught that you have to take in your first year or two. So there's curriculum coming for everyone. I have asked them to slow down a little bit because I would rather something be done well than fast. So hopefully next fall we'll have a model out, but I'm not sure yet. But another resource that it doesn't matter if you're English or not, and some of you may already know this, it's called Read, Write, Think. It's a part of NCTE. And if you don't know NCTE, it's National Council for Teachers of English. I have been a member of them since 1992, and it's less than $50 a year for dues. And you can get things electronically. There's an annual conference. It's always the week before Thanksgiving for some reason. But NCTE is amazing because I've had the privilege of going as a secondary teacher and then as a professor and seeing it's really all of us as one. You've got preschool teachers and people who are emeritus professors in pedagogy in the same place, just talking about what's good for students. How do we help teachers? What's a great way to create resources? And one of the things that they've done, I think it's about 20 years old now, Read, Write, Think. And when you get these slides, that underlined Read, Write, Think is a hyperlink, but I went ahead and included the website for you, readwritethink.org. It's basically, these are their words. Their mission is to provide educators, parents, and after-school professionals with access to the highest quality practices in reading and language arts instruction by offering the very best in free materials. And when I went a couple of days ago to see it, they've redesigned their website, which I couldn't figure out, but you will be able to because you're smarter than me. But you can go in and plug in your state because they have all of it aligned by state standards or the Common Core standards or NCTE standards. So if you want a lesson on narrative for 9th grade, you can find that. You can narrow it down. They might show 5 or 6 lessons that have those keywords and that you can align to your standards. And everything on there is free and it's all been vetted. It's high quality stuff. And so a lot of stuff that I think I stole from some of that, in the past from our colleagues. So that's a resource that I encourage you to use. I don't know if history has something like it. There's probably something like an NCTE for history, because I know there's an NCTM for math. So whatever the history thing is, sorry, I don't get paid by them, but I do highly encourage if you join your professional organizations, it can really make a difference over time. If nothing else, you get a sense of community, as well as like what's happening here with the Humanities Texas. I'm excited they're working on art. I would love to see art and writing. So last slide, these are some things that I included, and I think they're all available for you, or they will be. The syllabus is my syllabus for when I teach freshman composition the second semester. We don't do the first semester at A&M. Students are expected to know that. So we only do the second semester. So that's that syllabus. And then there's a PSA assignment within it. The PSA assignment relates to the research paper because the research paper, I make them solve an issue of concern to a local community. Or research an issue of concern to a local community, knowing you can't solve homelessness in 8 to 10 pages. So, but you can look at ways to improve it in a specific area. So with that assignment, I really drive them crazy because well, what does local mean? I don't know. What does local mean? So, do you mean in Bryan? I don't know. Do I mean in Bryan? Well, what is community? I don't know. You tell me. So to make them figure out, and it really makes them go focus on something that matters to them. And this is kind of before AI. This is still my response to how do you combat cheating or, using generative AI. If it's something that really matters to them, the computer's still not going to write it with the same humanistic quality that you'll get. And that's something I've learned from my grad students, that if you really do write your own prompt and the students really do walk through it, then there are ways to avoid. Now they can use AI to get help if they're stuck, but it's really about if you keep writing, being authentic and being engaged, then they're going to Some are going to cheat. I'm not going to lie, but they'll give you the work you need. The research paper, it's broken down into steps because I'm a huge believer in the process of give me a topic proposal, and it's no credit. I mean, or it's all one completion credit, where they just tell me, I think I want to work on this. They don't have to find any sources or even validate it. It might not even be a valid point, but it gets them started. And then they'll have an annotated bibliography. And that's where we really put in the information literacy piece about where they pull sources and then they have to summarize them and find key elements and talk about how they work in their argument. And then they do a rough draft, we do a peer review and a final draft. So there's a bunch of different steps in that. But the PSA assignment is something that I have them start on at the beginning of the semester. And that's where in groups of 3 to 4, they have to solve an issue of concern to Aggies. And so the smart students will make their group focus on the issue of concern that their local community is working on, because shouldn't all issues be? So it's kind of a way to also get them teaching them think smart, look at the big picture that you have to do at the end of this semester and work backwards to how do you manage your time yourself. I've included some rubrics, and then the grading quick marks. A lot of that's not even my language. I'm not even sure where I got some of it over the years, but feel free. It's an Excel sheet to use. Some of the notes might not make sense because I probably put something in myself, like a little canned comment for use this on the visual analysis because this keeps popping up, or something like that. But those can really save you time. If you're not writing or typing the same thing over and over, and it'll drive you crazy too if you think, I have written 17 times now not to do this or to do this, that if you just can copy and paste it. And I'd like to say that it gets better. It doesn't, because I have faculty who still don't. They ask for biology knowledge mastery and not, what do you mean? So it's all levels. And that is my email address. You are more than welcome to reach out to me. I don't mind at all. I may not respond right away, but I will respond. I promise. And trying to come up with anything. So I have, without further ado, if I can find my mouse, I can stop share. How's that? 10 minutes or about 7 minutes, Laura, for questions or comments?